The evening sun glowed over the wide glass windows of the Leighton estate, lighting up every white marble corner like a stage that existed, just to show how rich a person could be. Inside, everything was polished, shining, expensive, and arranged in a way that made visitors feel small. That was exactly how Mr. Leighton liked it. He enjoyed grand spaces, heavy chandeliers, thick carpets, and silence that followed his footsteps. Clara had been working in that house for only a week, yet she already knew the routine. She woke up before sunrise, ironed the clothes, polished the silver trays, and dusted the piano room that, strangely, no one ever played in. She kept her head low for every instruction, responded with a soft yes or I will do that, and never complained. Though not many noticed, Clara carried a gentleness in how she moved. She wiped each photo frame slowly, ranged things back precisely, and cleaned the grand piano as if it mattered. She never looked directly into Mr. Leighton's eyes, not because she feared him, but because he rarely looked at anyone the way he looked at himself, full of importance. That night, Mr. Leighton had guests arriving. He liked guests not for friendship or warmth, but for an audience. His gatherings were less about enjoyment and more about displaying the new garden fountain, imported crystal glasses, and the latest watch he bought from a limited collection overseas. Clara was in the kitchen, preparing the dining room, when she heard footsteps approach. The head housekeeper whispered that Mr. Leighton wanted everything perfect. He was entertaining business partners, and he wanted no wrinkle on the tablecloths and no dust on any corner. Clara nodded and straightened everything again, even though it was already flawless. Soon the doorbell rang and laughter filled the lobby. Shoes clacked, perfumes mixed with fresh flowers, and voices floated through the hallway loud, full of self-importance and expensive pride. Mr. Leighton walked ahead, speaking loudly, making sure people heard him. "This house is a representation of discipline," he announced. "Nothing here is accidental. When you work hard and think correctly, everything aligns." His guests nodded as if those words were deep wisdom. Clara simply continued polishing the last silver spoon. The evening continued with drinks served in tall glasses, rich appetizers, and business conversations that sounded less like conversations and more like self-approval. Clara walked between them, holding trays, placing napkins, and clearing empty plates. Most guests didn't look at her. When they did, it was just for pressing demands: water, another snack, or adjusting a chair. Yet Clara stayed calm, polite, steady. Later in the night, someone noticed the piano. "Why do you keep such a large one if no one uses it?" a guest asked. Mr. Leighton smiled with pride. "It is a grand piano. It stays because it shows taste. You don't have to play something to own it. You simply have to afford it." The crowd laughed not because it was funny, but because Mr. Leighton had said it. Clara was passing by at that moment. Someone heard her humming, a soft, gentle tune, almost like whispering melody. Under her breath, the remark came immediately: "One day we may ask the maid to give a performance," one man said jokingly. The room erupted with laughs again. Clara lowered her eyes and walked faster. "Did she blush?" Another guest smirked. "She must think humming is singing," a woman said. Mr. Leighton enjoyed the attention, and without thinking much, he joined in. "In this house, we don't need untrained singing. We have real music, not casual humming while carrying plates." The words fell like stones in water. Clara heard them clearly. Though her steps kept moving, she did not react, not outwardly, but her heart tightened, not from embarrassment, but from an ache that lived inside her. 4 years later, when the guests moved to the long dining table, Clara kept serving silently, but one of the guests, slightly kinder than others, asked casually, "Girl, do you actually sing?" Clara shook her head gently. "No, I don't sing. I was just humming." Mr. Leighton cut in. "She doesn't sing, she's just learning how to place utensils correctly." Again the guests laughed. Clara stepped back slowly, not wanting attention anymore. There was no anger in her eyes, only resignation. People like them didn't want to know what she liked or what she once dreamed of. She was, to them, just someone cleaning and carrying trays. Minutes later, when the food was being cleared, Clara passed by the piano again, and this time she slowed down. Her hand lightly brushed the polished wood. As she dusted its edge, a memory passed through her: a distant music hall, bright lights, the sound of applause. But memories were not always gifts. Sometimes they hurt. She blinked the thought away and continued with her task. In the living room, Mr. Leighton continued entertaining with loud opinions. He talked about investments, success, discipline, self-made achievements. His guests repeated his words back to him, like an echo. Clara kept watching from the corner, Not intentionally, but because she had to serve them. She watched the piano again, untouched yet important, just like so many things in that house. A guest called her over again. "Why don't you smile?" he said. "People like you should at least look grateful. You're working in a big house, aren't you?" Clara gave a small smile, not forced, just polite. "I'm grateful," she said softly, not because she owed them that answer, but because fighting wasn't her nature. She left before they said anything else. For the rest of the night, Clara stayed behind the scenes, washing, arranging, folding, and preparing the next things before people even asked. She worked with precision, and the head housekeeper whispered once, "You're good at this. He hasn't complained about you yet." That was considered praise. When the night ended and guests left, the room smelled of expensive cologne and burnt candles. Chairs were out of place, glasses scattered, napkins fallen. Clara worked past midnight, quiet and determined. She wanted to rest, but she also knew tasks had to be done before dawn. The piano stood silently in its corner. Clara paused again and looked at it, gently, like someone recognizing an old friend who no longer remembered them. There once was a time when her hands moved across keys effortlessly, when people cheered, when her teacher said she would go far, when her future seemed shaped by music, not cleaning, not carrying trays. But life doesn't ask before changing direction. She wiped the edge of the piano and walked away, upstairs. Mr. Layton leaned back in his bed, satisfied with the evening. He believed people admired him more after tonight. He believed everything in his house served a purpose, including the piano that stayed pretty, untouched. He never imagined that someone under his own roof could do something with it that he couldn't even if he tried. And Clara never imagined that a day would soon arrive when she would sit at that piano again, not quietly, not in secret, but in front of an entire room. For now, though, she simply finished her work, washed her hands, and ended the day with tired steps. But in her heart, something small remained, a memory, like soft humming, waiting for its chance to return. The morning after the gathering, the house was quieter than usual. Sunlight rested over the living room floor, stretching across the empty space where the guests had laughed the night before. Clara entered with her cleaning cart, rolling it slowly so nothing scratched the polished surface. The night still lived in her memory, not the noise, not the laughter, but that moment when the piano became the center of the room again. Even though no one touched it, she dusted the chairs first, collecting fine crumbs that fell during dinner. She folded napkins, washed glasses, and wiped fingerprints from table edges. Every movement was steady, careful. If someone watched her without knowing who she really was, they might have believed her life had always been this simple. The head housekeeper walked through, checking her progress. He asked for the piano room to be cleaned again, she said. He will be showing the house to someone today. Make sure it looks perfect. Clara nodded. She always nodded. She went toward the piano room, opened the tall doors, and stepped inside. Even the air there felt different, quiet, untouched, almost waiting. The piano sat under a soft light from the tall window, and for a moment she stood still. Her fingers brushed the surface, lightly, not wiping yet, just feeling where memories once lived. She placed her cloth gently on top and began cleaning. A voice echoed from behind. "It always shines, doesn't it?" It was Mr. Layton. She stepped back immediately. "Good morning, sir." He walked in, not looking at her first, only at the piano. "It's rare to find such pieces," he said proudly. "Imported, handmade, custom wood, original interior parts. Most people would never even see one in their life." Clara listened but didn't respond. "You like music, apparently," he said in a distant tone. "A little," she replied quietly. "You hummed yesterday." He said it as a reminder, not as conversation. "Yes, I'm sorry if that bothered anyone." He smirked. "You didn't bother anyone. You just amused them. We rarely see someone humming at work." She lowered her eyes again. "I was not trying to amuse anyone," she said. He waved his hand as if brushing her words away. "Never mind. Just make this place look spotless. Someone is coming who appreciates value. They will need to see how refined the atmosphere is." He left without waiting for her reply. Once alone, Clara continued working. She cleaned the bench, the curves of the piano legs, the space beneath, then stood up and looked at the keys. Just for a moment, her hands hovered above them, not touching, almost like remembering how fingers once traveled that path. But she stopped herself. She had work to finish. By afternoon, Mr. Layton had his guest, a tall man with a serious face and strong posture. They walked through the house like two investors inspecting something valuable. Clara watched them walk into room after room, showing paintings, chandeliers, carpets. Then they reached the piano room. "This piece is something rare," Mr. Layton boasted again. "Imported at a special price." The guest nodded. "Do you play?" he asked Dotmer. Layton's face stiffened for a fraction of a second. "Well," he replied, "I understand music. I can play enough to appreciate quality." Clara stood nearby, holding a tray of coffee cups. "What about your staff?" the guest asked jokingly. "Maybe they play more than you do." Mr. Layton chuckled. "The maid tried singing yesterday. It was amusing. Maybe she thinks humming is music." The guest smiled faintly, not mockingly, just politely. "What if she truly knows how to play?" he asked. "Oh, she doesn't," Layton said quickly. "She wouldn't understand anything about such instruments." The guest moved closer to the piano, running his fingers over its surface. "I knew someone long ago," he said thoughtfully. "She worked in a hotel. No one believed she played. Until one night, someone forced her to, and she played beautifully. I still remember it." People often hide real gifts when life doesn't give them space to use them. Clara's heart paused for a second. She wondered whether meant his words to reach her, or whether they floated without intention. Layton only smiled. "Well, that sounds poetic," he replied, wanting the conversation back in his direction. The men left again, leaving the echo of that moment behind. Later that evening, a conversation surfaced about musicians and talent. Some guests were back again. They talked about concerts, performers, shows, real talent. Someone said, "Requires early training. Without proper education, you cannot become great." Clara was nearby, clearing glasses, quietly listening. The same guest continued, "Just liking music doesn't make someone talented." Double quotes. Mr. Layton leaned back confidently. "Exactly. Talent must be shaped by resources. Without access, nothing grows. Which is why some people remain in simple positions. They never get the right training, so they never rise." Clara heard it clearly. Not because he said it loudly, but because it was directed toward her without using her name. The room burst into conversation again. One of the guests pointed back at the piano. "You could try teaching her something someday," he joked. Layton laughed. "What would be the point? If someone doesn't have the base, you can't build anything." Everyone agreed. Except Clara. She didn't show disagreement on her face. She simply turned away and walked to the kitchen. Inside the kitchen, she filled water glasses, folded napkins again, and arranged plates. But her mind was somewhere else, on old nights when she once practiced scales, until her fingertips hurt, when her teacher corrected her rhythm, when competitions were something possible. She remembered the sound of applause, not loud applause, just enough to make a young girl believe she mattered. She finished her work and stepped outside for a moment to breathe the night air. The garden lights glowed softly, and the fountain water dropped rhythmically. Silence filled her mind. Working in a big house sometimes felt smaller than working anywhere else, because no matter how wide the space was, she did not belong anywhere except corners, service rooms, back hallways. She leaned against a bench for a moment, closing her eyes not to rest, but to pause. Memory. Minutes passed before she went back inside. When she reached the dining room again, the men had moved into deeper conversation. A guest said, "If someone really knows music, ask them to play something. You cannot hide skill. A true musician reveals themselves." Mr. Layton responded confidently, "True. Let's test her someday. If she thinks humming is talent, she should be ready to face a piano." They laughed again, unaware that the words landed exactly like challenges. The head housekeeper walked up to Clara quietly. "Don't take anything they say seriously," she whispered. "People who live like them don't always think before speaking." Clara nodded. "I'm fine," she answered, but she wasn't sure. Later, after everyone left, she cleaned again, collecting glasses, wiping tables, stacking plates carefully so they didn't clatter. When she reached the piano room one last time, the lights were dim. She stood near the bench, placed her cleaning cloth aside, and looked at the keys again. Just for a moment, she lifted the cover with slow movement. Her fingers hovered over the white keys, not yet touching, just feeling distance between what was and what currently existed. Then from somewhere inside her, a quiet voice whispered that she knew every note beneath her fingers. She pressed one key. Soft sound. Then another. Two notes together. Not music, not yet. Just shadow of memory. Before she could continue, footsteps sounded outside. She closed the cover quickly and stepped away. She picked up her cleaning cloth and acted as if she had just finished wiping. Mr. Layton walked in, surprised to find her still working. "You can leave the room," he said. There's nothing left to clean. She nodded. Double quotes yes. Sir, she walked out, but behind her, the piano sat in silence, holding the faint sound of two notes that faded too quickly. Night moved on. Clara lay in her small room later, the walls bare, the lamp soft, the ceiling plain. She closed her eyes and replayed those two notes, and without meaning to, she hummed softly, not loud enough for anyone to hear, just enough for her heart to remember something that once belonged to her. Even if the world believed she never had it, within days, that moment would return again, but not quietly. And not with just two notes for now, though. She simply slept, unaware that soon the piano would not stay silent anymore. Days passed quietly inside the grand house. Yet something had shifted, at least for Clara. The sound of those two piano notes stayed inside her mind every morning when she woke up, and every night when she finished her work. They reminded her of a life that once belonged to her, though now it felt like something distant and unreachable. She tried to ignore the feeling, but some memories are too stubborn to fade. One afternoon, the head housekeeper handed her a list of tasks for the day. Mr. Layton was planning another gathering, smaller this time, but still important. Some guests from the earlier evening would return. Clara nodded and took the paper, studying every line. The final instruction said, "Prepare living room and music room for evening hours." Reading that brought a quiet knot to her stomach. By noon, the house was busy again. The gardeners trimmed hedges outside. Someone rearranged flowers in crystal vases, and Clara moved through each room preparing everything. She polished silver pieces, wiped glass tables, and arranged cushions without leaving a wrinkle. She worked quietly, allowing her thoughts to wander, though she never showed that outwardly. The piano room was last on her list. She entered slowly, carrying her cleaning supplies. The sky outside was bright, and sunbeams landed directly on the piano lid, making it look more beautiful than usual. Clara paused a moment and gently lifted the cover. She didn't press a key, just looked. The keys appeared untouched, yet her memory knew their feel exactly. Just then, the head housekeeper entered. "You should polish the bench also," she said. "The guests sit sometimes, even if no one plays." Clara nodded. "I will." But the housekeeper stayed a moment longer. "Have you seen them practice, anyone?" "No," Clara answered softly. "They don't know how." The housekeeper whispered with a small smile. "I think that's why it sits here. He bought it because people with money like things they don't use." Clara did not reply, but she felt something warm in that truth. Evening arrived sooner than expected. Guests began entering, though not many this time. Small conversations floated through the rooms. Clara served drinks and guided trays around the living room. Most guests talked about work, new company openings, investments, travel, and expensive hobbies. Some looked at Clara only when they needed something. Others continued ignoring her completely. At one point, a guest asked Mr. Layton, "Have you practiced piano lately?" It sounded like light teasing. He straightened a little, pretending confidence. "I could play anytime," he said, "but you need the right mood for music. Perhaps later." Someone else looked toward Clara. "What about the humming musician?" He joked. Clara paused mid-step, not knowing if she was expected to. Answered she still thinks humming is music. Another man added. Everyone laughed again, except Clara. She only lowered her gaze and continued, serving. Later into the evening, one guest said, "Why don't we have music tonight? This room is perfect for it." Mr. Layton laughed, pretending he liked the idea. "A guest would need true talent to entertain us," he said. "Not anyone can sit at the piano." Someone remarked, "Then maybe let her try. Who knows? Maybe we will discover something unexpected." Clara froze. Her hand tightened around the tray she was holding. "I would rather not." Mr. Layton replied quickly, "Music requires skill. She wouldn't know proper notes." He said it confidently, yet his voice showed slight discomfort, as if someone saw something he didn't want seen. A different guest smirked. "Maybe she knows something you don't." Clara walked away before anyone pushed further. She returned to the kitchen, setting down the tray. She tried focusing on cleaning glasses, but her mind wasn't steady. The words replayed, not the jokes, not the laughter, but that small question. Maybe she knows something you don't. She held onto that. A few moments later, a quiet voice called from behind, "Girl, come." It was one of the guests, not rude, just direct. She followed him into the living room, unsure of why. "Come here," he said louder, gathering attention. Mr. Layton looked irritated. "What is this?" he asked. The guest smiled calmly. "We keep talking about talent. Let us settle it. Ask her to play one song. If she does well, we stop making jokes. If she doesn't, We drop the topic forever. There was quiet laughter round the room, light, careless laughter. The kind that comes from people who think they already know the result. Leighton hesitated, then said, "Fine, if she agrees." Clara wanted to step back, not forward. She didn't wish to prove anything, not to them, not to him. Her world had changed long ago. She wasn't the girl who performed in front of crowds anymore. Now she ironed napkins. But before she could answer, someone called out, "Let her try." "Why not?" Another voice added, "One song, then we can eat." Clara held her breath. "I don't want to interrupt anything," she said softly. "No," the guest insisted. "This will take 1 minute." There was no way to refuse without seeming disrespectful, so she walked toward the piano, slow steps, steady posture. No excitement on her face. Murray Leighton folded his arms, wearing a smile that looked confident from far away but uneasy up close. Clara sat on the bench. She kept her eyes lowered for a moment. Her fingers rested lightly on top of the keys but didn't press. For a heartbeat-long moment, no one spoke. Then she pressed a single key. Soft sound filled the room. She pressed another, then another. At first, the notes were slow. People exchanged looks, some amused, some waiting. But then something shifted. Her fingers eased into familiarity, into memory that took shape without permission. Notes connected into flow, soft, pure, delicate. She played not loudly, not grandly, but with a gentle precision that carried emotion. The sound filled the room, not like a show, but like truth. Voices went silent, movement stopped, even air paused. People listened not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The piece wasn't something simple. It was structured, deep, layered. Notes changed pace, slowed, lifted, and softened again. Her posture straightened, not proud, not dramatic, just full of quiet certainty. She finished with the lightest touch of 3 closing notes. Silence followed. A true silence, the kind that does not know how to breathe. When people finally reacted, it wasn't laughter. It was disbelief. One guest whispered, This wasn't random. That was trained playing." Another said, "That was professional level." Someone gently asked, "Where did you learn that?" Clara didn't answer. She simply stood. Leighton looked frozen, not angry, not embarrassed, just stunned. How did you?" he tried saying. Clara only bowed her head slightly. "Dinner is ready. I will continue serving." She walked away. No one stopped her, not even the bold guest who insisted she play. When she reached the hallway, she paused and breathed deeply. The moment was over. It was gone. She returned to her work. In the living room, conversations resumed, but not like earlier. Someone whispered, "She was trained. That was not beginner playing." Another said, "Why is she working as a maid?" Someone else replied quietly, "Life changes people." Mr. Leighton excused himself from the room and followed Clara to the kitchen. "Where did you learn that?" he asked quietly. No laughter now, no presenting himself above her. Clara continued stacking plates. "Long ago," she said. "But you played like a professional." "I played when I was younger. I stopped." "Why?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't owe answers. He stood silently, watching her hands move, steady, work-worn, yet capable of something he could never achieve even with all his wealth. That night changed something in him. And changed something in everyone who heard her. But Clara went to sleep as usual, and though her heart felt heavy, it also felt strangely awake, like something forgotten had been given one more breath. The morning after the evening performance, the house felt different. Not outwardly different, everything was in place, polished and perfect, but the air carried a subtle change. The guests who had witnessed Clara play last night had left quietly, speaking in hushed tones. Some had already called their friends or colleagues, whispering about the unexpected talent of the maid. It was as if the world beyond the house suddenly knew that appearances could be deceiving. Clara moved through her tasks as usual. She cleaned, polished, and arranged items with careful hands. But there was a lightness in her movements that hadn't been there before. Her work felt smaller now, yes, but it also felt like a preparation for something bigger. When she passed the piano room, she paused and allowed her fingers to hover over the keys, not pressing them yet, but acknowledging the connection she still had. Murray Leighton, meanwhile, walked through the house more slowly than usual. He seemed distracted, sometimes staring at the piano, sometimes staring at Clara, as if trying to reconcile the quiet maid he had known with the musician who had silenced the room. He caught himself several times in the hall, wanting to say something but unsure what. It was unfamiliar to him to feel small in someone else's presence, especially someone he considered beneath him. By afternoon, a music professor arrived at the house. He was invited by one of the guests who had attended the previous evening. The professor was an older man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. As soon as he entered, he went straight to the piano room, greeting Clara politely. "I heard about last night," he said softly. "May I?" Clara nodded, though she kept her hands folded in front of her. The professor ran his fingers lightly over the keys, testing their sound. Then he looked at Clara with keen interest. "Do you still play regularly?" "I haven't played in years," she admitted quietly. "You have skill, unmistakable skill," he said, almost to himself. "The control, the flow, the understanding of expression. It's rare. Most young musicians would envy your touch and phrasing." Clara felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort. It wasn't for the sake of praise, but for being recognized in a way that didn't belittle her. Mr. Layton stood behind her, his hands clasped behind his back. "She's my maid," he said in a tone that tried to sound casual. "That's all she is. She works here. She doesn't perform." The professor turned to him, eyes steady. "And yet she performed last night with clarity and emotion that most trained musicians could not match." The world sometimes underestimates talent hidden behind daily labor. Mr. Layton swallowed, feeling a discomfort he wasn't used to. He wanted to argue, to reassert his dominance, but he couldn't. The truth of the music hung between them like a weight. "Would you consider teaching her again?" the professor asked gently. Clara shook her head. "I don't have time. My life. It's different now. You only need the time you can give. It's not about abandoning your life, it's about reclaiming something lost. Talent like yours does not disappear. It waits." She looked at the keys again, remembering the way her hands had once moved freely across them. For a moment, she saw herself as she had been a girl in a small music room, a teacher guiding her through scales and arpeggios, her fingers moving as naturally as breathing. The memory brought warmth to her chest. "I stopped because life demanded it," she said quietly. "I had responsibilities, music. It wasn't possible." The professor nodded. "I understand. But what if it could be possible again?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The thought lingered in the air. Later, in the living room, the guests returned, this time fewer, but with curiosity in their eyes. They had heard rumors about Clara's performance. Some were eager to witness more, while others wanted to discuss the matter privately with Mr. Layton. He found himself in conversations that left him frustrated and uneasy, as though his own knowledge of the house and the people in it was suddenly insufficient. Clara moved through the room, serving drinks, her head bowed slightly. She was aware of the whispers, the stolen glances, the sudden pause when someone noticed her hands or her expression, but she ignored them. She had already decided that her presence did not have to validate her past or her talent. It simply existed alongside her work. That evening, the professor returned to the piano room alone with Clara. "Show me something," he requested gently. "Just a short piece." She hesitated. Memories of judgment, embarrassment, and long years of hidden practice filled her mind. But the professor's calm expectation was different. It didn't demand. It invited. Slowly, she sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then pressed down lightly. The notes rang clear, soft, and precise. She moved through the piece without hesitation. Every chord, every rhythm, every nuance revealed the depth of her training, years of practice, a natural musical intuition. The professor listened without interruption, eyes closed at times, nodding slightly. When the piece ended, the room was silent for a moment. "That was beautiful," he said finally. "You have not lost your gift. You only paused it. Talent like yours waits for opportunity, and opportunity is here." Clara felt a quiet surge of emotion she hadn't felt in years. Relief, recognition, and something else. Hope. Layton entered then, standing in the doorway, witnessing the scene. His expression was unreadable, but his mind raced. He had always measured value by money, by control, by appearances. Here was someone under his roof who had real skill, real power, real presence. And he had mocked her, ignored her, belittled her. He realized, maybe for the first time, that talent was not something he could buy, control, or own. "Your skill," he began, but stopped. Words felt useless. Clara smiled faintly, not with pride, not with triumph, but with calm acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said simply. The professor left soon after, leaving Clara and Mr. Layton alone. The silence between them was different from before, not tense, not confrontational. It was reflective. "Maybe I misjudged you," he said finally. "I assumed." "I know," she interrupted softly. "You assumed because of what you saw, not what you knew. It's natural." He nodded, unsure what else to say. For the first time, He saw Clara differently, not just as a maid, not just as someone beneath him, but as a person with skill, depth, and experience that he could not understand or control. That night, Clara returned to her room, sitting quietly by the window. The moonlight touched the piano keys even from afar, and she thought of the professor's words, the soft encouragement, the validation she hadn't known she needed. She hummed a few notes softly, almost as if testing them, almost as if confirming that the music was still hers. The next day, she continued her work, but with a subtle change. She was the same maid to the eyes of the household, performing the same tasks with the same diligence. But inside, she carried a secret understanding that her talent was not lost, that recognition had begun, and that life might still hold a path back to music. Leighton, meanwhile, found himself walking past the piano more often. Sometimes he stood there, looking at the polished surface, the black and white keys, and he couldn't help but remember last night's performance. He had no words to capture the feeling, only the quiet realization that he had underestimated someone beneath him, and that lesson would linger far longer than he expected. Clara's life continued, as work always does, but the quiet acknowledgement of her talent now lived alongside her routine, and she knew, deep down, that it would not remain silent for long. The music waited, the opportunity waited, and for the first time in many years, she felt the possibility of returning to it, not for others, not to prove anything, but because it was a part of who she was. Days passed after the professor's visit, and life inside the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Clara continued her work with careful hands and steady feet, but the subtle shift in her mind and spirit remained. She was no longer just the silent, obedient maid who went unnoticed. Her own sense of identity had returned quietly, like a candle lit after a long darkness. Mr. Leighton noticed it, too. He observed her more than he intended, not in the way of a master judging a servant, but in the curious, unsettled way of someone realizing they had been wrong. He would find himself pausing outside rooms where she worked, noting the precision of her movements, the calm certainty in her actions, and the quiet dignity she carried without asking for it. One morning, a letter arrived from the music professor. Clara opened it carefully, expecting perhaps a simple thank you. Instead, it was an invitation. A small music conservatory in the city wanted to meet her. They had heard about her talent and wanted to offer her a chance to train, perform, and perhaps build a career again. The words on the paper seemed almost unreal after years of silence. Clara held the letter, reading and rereading it. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a combination of excitement and disbelief. She thought of her younger self, of the long hours at the piano, the dreams that had once seemed possible. And now, after years of putting music aside, the chance had returned. She showed the letter to the head housekeeper, who smiled warmly. "It's your talent," she said simply. "It deserves to be seen. Don't let it go." Clara nodded, feeling a strange courage growing within her. Later that day, she found herself in the piano room once again. The room was empty, sun streaming through the tall windows, the piano waiting as though it knew something significant was about to happen. She sat down, lifted the cover, and let her fingers rest gently on the keys. The notes came naturally, almost as if they had been waiting for her return. Slowly, carefully, she played a familiar piece, each chord full of expression and grace. The sound filled the room, soft yet vibrant, and for the first time in years, she felt completely at home with herself. Leighton entered quietly, watching her from the doorway. He didn't speak at first. He simply observed the ease and mastery with which she played. There was no boastfulness in her, no demand for recognition, just the music itself, flowing naturally, revealing the depth of her skill. He felt a mix of awe and humility. For the first time, he realized that money and control could not create such talent, and that he had been blind in dismissing her abilities. When she finished, she looked at him and smiled softly. "Thank you for giving me a piano to practice on," she said. Leighton nodded, his usual arrogance gone. I didn't know," he admitted quietly. "I underestimated you." Clara's smile didn't carry pride or triumph. It was simple acknowledgement of the truth that had finally been seen. Within the next few weeks, arrangements were made for Clara to visit the conservatory. She trained under skilled instructors, brushing up on techniques she had not used for years, performing in small recitals to build confidence. Each day, she discovered the joy of playing again, not for others' approval, but for the love of music itself. Her fingers remembered the touch of the keys, her ears recalled the subtle shifts in sound, and her heart felt lighter with every note. The house, too, changed subtly. Mr. Layton found himself moving past the piano more often, sometimes standing there in silence, listening to the faint notes Clara played during her practice. He no longer mocked or belittled her, instead offering quiet support when she asked for small accommodations, a space for practice, time to rest between chores, or simply an understanding nod. It was a different dynamic, one built on recognition and respect rather than control. One evening, after a long day of practice and lessons, Clara returned to the house and found the piano room empty. She sat down and let her hands wander over the keys, playing softly, lost in thought. Mr. Layton entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. He placed it beside her without interrupting. "You play beautifully," he said, almost in passing. Clara looked up briefly, her smile gentle. "Thank you. I never stopped, really. I only paused," he nodded, understanding more than he could express. The lesson of humility and recognition had settled into him deeply. He realized that talent, patience, and resilience were far more valuable than wealth or arrogance. Over the following months, Clara's progress at the conservatory accelerated. She performed at small gatherings, her music earning genuine admiration and respect. She received opportunities to collaborate with other musicians, and her confidence grew steadily. The world that had once underestimated her began to take notice, but Clara remained grounded, humble, and kind. Meanwhile, in the house, she continued her daily tasks, but with a newfound balance. Her work as a maid was no longer a limitation. It became a foundation of discipline and steadiness that complemented her musical growth. She moved with grace and assurance, knowing that her life had expanded beyond the roles assigned to her. Mr. Layton observed these changes with quiet reflection. He found himself listening to Clara's music in a way that felt personal and transformative. He began to understand that true greatness could not be measured by wealth, social status, or power. It existed in the dedication, passion, and perseverance of a person who nurtured their talent, no matter the obstacles. One afternoon, as Clara prepared for a small recital at the conservatory, she received a note from Mr. Layton. It simply read, "Good luck. The house and piano await your return." She folded the note carefully. Touched by the unexpected gesture, she realized that respect, once earned, could transform relationships, bridge gaps, and heal wounds left by misunderstanding or neglect. The recital went beautifully. Clara played with confidence, her music carrying the depth of her experience and the sweetness of reclaimed dreams. The audience listened in rapt attention, moved by the honesty and skill in each note. When she finished, applause filled the room, not merely polite clapping, but genuine admiration for the musician who had quietly emerged from a life of service to claim her rightful place. Returning home, she found Mr. Layton waiting near the piano. He smiled, not with superiority, but with quiet pride. "You were extraordinary," he said simply. Clara set down her bag, her eyes reflecting calm satisfaction. "Thank you for believing and letting me try," he nodded, understanding more in that moment than words could capture. It wasn't just music that had changed. It was perspective, humility, and acknowledgement. From that day forward, Clara's life continued on a path that balanced her duties with her passion. She practiced, performed, and trained, always remembering the journey that had brought her from silent work to recognition and respect. The piano, once a symbol of neglect and underestimation, became a bridge to her future, a reminder of resilience, patience, and the quiet power of hidden talent. Mr. Layton, too, changed. He became a different kind of host, one who listened, observed, and valued the gifts of others beyond appearances. The relationship between him and Clara evolved, built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Clara's story spread quietly, inspiring others who felt confined by circumstance, proving that talent and dedication could not remain hidden forever. And though she faced challenges, doubt, and obstacles along the way, she moved forward with a calm confidence that came from knowing her own worth and the music that always lived within her. In the end, it was not about proving anyone wrong, nor about seeking approval. It was about reclaiming what had always been hers: the music, the passion, the life she had paused but never abandoned. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she was reminded that silence can be powerful, patience can be rewarding, and recognition, when it comes, can change everything quietly, profoundly, and forever.